Since PS4 and Xbox One, consoles have moved to more PC-like architectures, at least in terms of CPU, GPU, with some clear benefits, but arguably losing some of their distinctive factors for good or for bad. Do you think there's still space for consoles with bespoke hardware to push gaming technology in new and interesting ways? And even if there is not, is it something that you would ideally like to see? So, exotic consoles, Tom, what do you reckon?
Oh, we've learned our lesson, I think, since PS3. The Exotica that Cerny mentioned of the, regarding the cell processor. I mean, I think there's always something exciting about. I mean, we've covered, I think the PS3 360 sort of comparison was always very exciting for that specific reason, that there was this exotic element to the architecture. What could one console do that the other could not? And one had a Blu-ray player, one had a cell processor, the other had a more streamlined x86. It wasn't x86.
No, it was PowerPC, but it had a better. It just had better cross-platform. Credentials, much better GPU, unified memory. The list goes on.
Yeah, split memory on PS5 set up so many woes for developers. It was that was an interesting time, but also an absolute nightmare for developers to navigate. And I'm sure that the quality of games on PS4, Xbox One onwards speaks to how easy it's been to develop, how easy it is to navigate between PS4 and PC. So yeah, in a way, I think we're set on this course. I mean, even Switch uses sort of parts that have been appropriated from other devices. It's the Shield tech essentially. And so it's part of a sort of a pipeline that we know already exists. I think there's value in just facilitating development for developers easier. And that has been a winning formula. And it's true for where Sony is taking, the PS5 and like the PS5 Pro by the sounds of things. So,
Yeah, definitely. Oliver.
Yes. I mean, I still think there can be room for some interesting stuff on the consoles, some unique stuff. This isn't totally novel, but I do remember Mark Cerny talking, I think around the launch of the PS4, about an early PS4 concept that involved achieving an insane amount of bandwidth, like over 1 terabyte per second,
right?
Using some EDRAM, combining traditional memory with a big pool of EDRAM. That's not completely out of left field because consoles have used similar technologies in the past. But that is the kind of thing you'd probably only see on a console, and probably you would only get from significant buy-in on a console platform from developers who are building their titles to take advantage of that pool of EDRAM. So I think you could do something unorthodox like that. I think that maybe you could do something interesting with like a dedicated physics processing unit or areas of a GPU that are dedicated to physics processing on board a console SoC. I think you could also probably do something interesting at this point, although this isn't as console specific too much, but something interesting with chiplets, or maybe you can mix and match different chiplets to create different console SKUs, do a bunch of different console SKUs that way without having to design lots of bespoke chips, just combine like some Zen 6 CCXs or whatever and some graphics tiles and whatnot. But in general, I think it's hard at the moment because the consoles are so closely linked to PC, and you see so much stuff in the AMD portfolio in particular on PC and on consoles, or on consoles first, then on PC. So I think it's kind of hard to look at it right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. See, whenever you speak to Mark Cerny, he's not happy about PC comparisons. And with PlayStation 5, he'll be pointing to stuff like, repurposing a compute unit to produce this bespoke audio blog. He'll be talking about the file decompression hardware that's been built into PlayStation 5, which we know has produced great results. He'll be talking about the dedicated SSD built into the motherboard with a bespoke controller. He'll be talking about the DualSense controller with the haptics. There's a lot happening in the console space that isn't sort of primarily related to what choice of CPU and GPU architecture you have. Because, why would you create a bespoke GPU when you've got AMD who've been making these things for decades, producing good work. It just doesn't really make sense. Makes sense to make some tailored optimizations or changes. Obviously, going back to PlayStation 4, we had the additional asynchronous compute pipelines because, Sony looked at the design and thought, hey, this is actually a really good idea. Let's beef it up. And, PS4 Pro, there were some interesting things they did there in terms of the checkerboarding hardware, which wasn't, didn't turn out to be as transformative as they might have hoped, but it was an interesting idea that was actually superseded by good software. In terms of what we're seeing on the consoles at the moment and stuff that is going to feed back into PC, again, Mark Cerny talks about that recently in terms of, looking to stuff like direct storage happening as a result of stuff that's happening in the console space. The file decompression block. I mean, NVIDIA has made a chip for the Switch 2 that has a file decompression block because it just makes sense, right? Bespoke hardware, dedicated hardware block within the processor that basically takes care of file decompression for you. It frees up a lot of CPU resources, and we can see that because PC doesn't have that at the moment. And you look at like The Last of Us Part 1, where all of that burden is being placed upon the CPU, meaning you need a much more powerful CPU to get console-level performance. So I don't think the major architectural building blocks like, I don't see Mark Cerny saying, right, okay, Cell 2.0, let's do it. x86 is fine, it's great. Maybe they'll move to ARM, which is a consideration that Microsoft has in mind, bearing in mind the FTC leaks that we saw. Radeon GPUs, they're great. The only real sort of game-changing difference you could potentially do would be to consider a partnership with NVIDIA instead, where the focus of that GPU changes somewhat. And in actual fact, what we know of the PlayStation 5 Pro is that, a lot of the innovations that NVIDIA made, Sony has their own take on them. So I don't think there's going to be like major exotic consoles being produced, but there's going to be possibly the implementation of fixed function blocks that can actually produce game-changing differences. That's my take on it.